We are talking day 2 of South by Southwest, which is our coverage here sponsored by Bizarre Voice. So first of all, I want to introduce you to my panel. We'll start at the far end, which is Spencer-Michaelsen, who's a creative at DT. In the middle, rose amongst the thorns, as it were, is Kristy Richards, who's strategy director at the lab. And just to my left here is Daniel Bluzer-Fry, who is the senior planner at the lab. So guys, thank you very much for joining me today. A few tired faces here. It's only day 2, and I think everyone's already starting to feel the pinch a little bit. But you guys are actually probably have justifiable reason to be tired because you were presenting this morning, so you actually did a session.
We were indeed.
And that was the
yeah, it was a dual presentation actually, I should correct myself, and we're kind of discussing where we're going with innovation and looking at a number of different spheres of digital innovation, from the biometric revolution through to the different creative tools that are kind of entering our homes and our lives, along with virtual reality, to think about the implications that these kind of innovations are going to have for us socially, culturally, in our own lives, and what responsibilities brands have to make sure that that contributes to our happiness and doesn't actually kind of swing to the dark side and start to cause us issues.
Yeah, it was really cool. And it was all about sort of understanding the tensions that exist when you go into all these different areas. So what's the positive things technology can bring to sort of people, society, your sense of self, but also what are some of the watch outs that might happen, and sort of things that we need to have our minds open to, things that we need to start kind of thinking about and building strategies around, sort of moving forward, particularly brands, because they've actually got a real responsibility to start going, okay, what's the right type of innovation for us in the future? What's something that's actually going to kind of not just take our brand forward and actually make us money, but take people and society on the right journey as well? Because when you actually look at it, it's having such a huge impact on sort of who we are, how we act, the way we conduct relationships, our relationships itself. And I think that's something that we just kind of need to start to acknowledging.
Yeah, it feels like a very big responsibility to put on brands, and you're looking at marketers and CEOs and so on to sort of take that leadership role. Do you see that in sort of the new era as the leaders and the pioneers here?
So I think the really interesting point there is, I mean, we see this becoming more of a social issue. Just a while ago on my Twitter feed, I saw that there was a we really need to start thinking about where we're going to take artificial intelligence. And I mean, at that pointy end of the scale, it's extinction. Like, people are saying, if we don't get this right, same with bioengineering, the consequences are really severe. And from our end, make sure your products have the best utility and can give the most to your consumers. It doesn't mean that they're going to be ethically perfect products, because we're all different as people. Some people will use tools differently to others, and if people don't use them in a considered way, that can lead to kind of negative impact. To show consumers where the tension points are in their products, to kind of show the warts and all, so to speak, about some of the perils that may come with not using their tools in a considered.
Say, is it really brand's responsibility? I think that's like a great question, because to all intents and purposes, you know, they don't have to do it. They don't have to engage. They don't have to sense check what they're doing. It's actually a choice they've got to make. And it's a choice that's open to them. And it's a choice that I think can be incredibly beneficial for them. Because what it's actually going to do is enable them to have a more consistent, a longer and a deeper relationship with their consumers, which is only great for them, because it actually means they kind of develop greater loyalty, they'll develop being really proactive about that discussion and kind of managing the way their tools get used moving forward, and managing kind of the light and shade of those tools, and making sure that they get used and talked about in the sort of social sphere in the right way. So it's actually almost a little bit of PR for them as well by doing this, as well as social responsibility. It kind of brings those two things together.
I mean, I guess we've heard a lot in the last few years, the mantra is innovate or die.
Yeah.
Is this, you know, maybe, is this maybe, yeah, but is this maybe putting a handbrake a little bit on and saying, don't just innovate for the sake of it, but actually...
I don't think it is putting a handbrake on. I really don't. And I don't think it is about going, don't do this, don't do that. It's about putting sort of the education and the support in for when you do innovate. Kind of think about where that's going to go, think about the impact that's going to have on people's lives, and start to almost put together a bit of a 360-degree usership and relationship with your brand, so that when you innovate, it's kind of going to be more successful and more relevant, because you've thought about the positive and the negatives of it, and you've made sure you're with people on that journey, and you're taking people on that journey from kind of the whole human-centric design, which has been a big buzzword that people are talking about, from kind of like developing your products with people in mind, and therefore they're going to be better and successful and kind of more on par, and they're going to kind of deliver to people's needs, right through to when you think about, so let's make sure they make the right choice about the tech they're kind of getting, and make sure it's the right thing for them. And when they go through and using it, let's think about the different kind of the great experiences they can have and some of the more negative experiences they have. And let's almost hold their hand through that. Let's have a chat with them through that whole process and make sure we're with them.
I think to that point too, I mean, in terms of a handbrake, no one expects brands to be perfect.
No.
And brands can't be perfect. Like human-centric design, we're all different. So at best, you know, from a utilitarian standpoint, you're designing for the most possible people to improve their lives. And I guess from that end and point of view, we're saying it's the effort to actually kind of take the time to be more considered in not only the way that you obviously design up front, but to take the time and effort to make sure you're giving your consumers good experience through the journey. And I mean, it's not just an ethical, social responsibility, but we think that to that point too, that's where the opportunity for brands really sits, to cultivate a more meaningful and honest relationship with the people they serve.
Because some of the research we've done as well has kind of shown that brands who are kind of show themselves, you know, warts and all, and are kind of open and honest, actually people develop better connections with them and they like them better. So therefore they'll stick with them along the journey. And we've seen it all happen when sort of the whole kind of the rise of environmental kind of marketing kind of stuff. Okay. So we're not that great now, but we're making changes and we're being open and honest about that. And I almost see this being replicated in tech at the moment. It's almost, you've got to take people on the same journey. You've got to go, this is new. We're not 100%.
I guess you don't want to be the marketer who sort of sanctions Skynet, basically, do you?
Exactly.
And you know what, though?
With Google buying. The press about that, kind of saying that, like, DeepMind themselves said to Google, we're not going to put this through. We're not going to sell this brand to you unless you get an ethics panel in your business. And you're like, oh my God, what are you creating?
Lives. So, you know, they need to be ensuring that they're putting out platforms and strategies that do, I guess, have the good and bad side in mind, like, you know, and yeah, not worrying about, sometimes you're going to get it wrong. Or you're aiming for, just like, so.
And I think being open and honest and being about that means that when you do get it wrong, people will stick with you and go on the journey with you, as opposed to going, oh my God, what have you done? Yeah. So it actually helps with retention.
I guess that probably speaks a lot to the authenticity thing.
Exactly.
Again, a recurring theme throughout the whole conference. Yeah.
Everywhere.
And, you know,
VR is it's an industry in its infancy, and it's kind of being built from the ground up. So yeah, like the talk was called VR Trailblazers in the VR domain. So yeah, and it was really just that, because they're looking at how VR hasn't actually been cracked yet. You know, it hasn't had that, as they were calling the Uber moment or the Angry Birds moment. So it was really kind of calling of arms, like, to get people out there in the audience. It's like, you're the guys that will be, you know, experimenting, I guess. And for me, it was merging the gaming world and the film worlds combined there, because they were talking about how, you know, they played stuff with CGI in film, like in the film space, and that wasn't quite working. Then film with interactive, that wasn't quite working either. So yeah, that was the big problem that they're putting out there.
They don't really know where to go next, do they? I think they came across quite strongly that they were like, do you know what? We're kind of playing, we're experimenting, we're doing different things, because we're trying to work out what role this has, and actually we're basically creating a new medium, and we're not sure what that should look and feel and what shape it's going to take ultimately. So they're massively experimenting, which is quite exciting.
Yeah, sorry.
I was going to say, I think the really interesting thing there, and I went to a session with a doctor from the Netherlands named Kurt van Manshoff yesterday, and he was talking about, I guess, ticket option and how it kind of becomes part of our lives and part of our nature, so to speak. And he created a construct, a pyramid of sorts. And you think about where VR is at the moment as well, and it's very much in kind of an application phase. Like, think about things like solar panels. Like, we see getting applied and used, but it hasn't been adopted. Like, we haven't seen it into consumer households. And as a result, that means that the rate and scale of kind of innovation in that sphere, it's in some ways non-comparable to other areas. Right. As soon as there's consumer adoption and that kind of money starts to actually become far more tangible, you see a kind of influx of investment.
But consumers aren't going to adopt, are they, until there's something to really use it with?
Exactly. That's where I think that they're looking at film for that. And where it was a little bit of a shift in terms of from gaming to entertainment. Because I think that they can see that being more of a commercial success, and that getting a greater audience of people involved with VR.
But then even that, they were talking about the idea of sort of, like, how do you create a kind of a real storyline when actually your user is in control? So you immerse them in these amazing worlds that they can interact with, but how do you actually create a narrative that you're not in control? So it's almost like, I don't know, back when I was like, yeah, a choose your own adventure film. So how many different narratives do you need to create? How many scenarios,
because it starts here and then it branches out
until it makes sense? And what if they choose one that you've not prepared for?
How's anyone going to afford Ryan Gosling for that one?
Exactly.
I had to wear the whole first person gaming.
What are they going to do to Ryan Gosling in there as well? That's a whole other question.
They got him to say "hey girl" in the talk yesterday, so I think the world will be quite happy there.
Okay.
He's never said it before.
I think the other really interesting point on a lot of VR stuff is just the impact it's going to have in reorganising entertainment. And when you think about the kind of, looking, say, at real-time entertainment, sporting landscape, for instance, obviously we love our sports in Australia. But beyond kind of film and pre-recorded, like, where this will get in time is to new ways to immerse ourselves in real-time action. So you think about sports. It's not that far-fetched to think that in 10 or 15 years, you'll be able to kind of, let's take our #1 draft pick this year in the AFL, like Paddy McCartan, you'll be able to strap on kind of a nano camera onto, like, just kind of blot it onto Paddy's bib. You'll be able to kind of put a vest on in your own house so you can feel kind of the hits and the bumps, throw on your kind of Oculus, and you'll be able to look around as Paddy McCartan running around on an AFL field. So it's not just kind of film as a medium, but it's going to fundamentally transform the way we look at entertainment and immerse and connect with a lot of different things in coming years.
Yeah. Not to go through what the AFL boys go through when I'm sat in my armchair drinking a bit. But I guess it sort of throws up a lot of sort of issues. And I was in a session this morning where Morgan Spurlock, who, the filmmaker, was talking about VR as sort of the next sort of step really for content and so on, sort of looking at different ways. But I guess, it's sort of how they use that technology, because you've got to have a 360.
down at the gaming expo. We had a bit of wander over there to the masses of kids down there and like having their gaming tournaments. But there's a game in particular using Oculus Rift in the indie section called Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes. Have you guys heard of the game at all? And it's a two-person game where one person wears the Oculus and the other person doesn't. And so the person wearing the Oculus has to defuse a bomb, but they don't have the instructions. So the person that can't see the Oculus has got the instructions, and they're quite detailed instructions and have to read through them. I thought that's a different use of Oculus, like that's breaking the worlds and bringing them together. And I thought that's a really interesting play on that space.
Sounds like sort of team building communications type.
Well, this is the thing. So, and I think actually its ability to connect people and help them understand a different point of view could actually be quite powerful. So they were talking about a lot of them using like VR for actual social action. And actually putting yourself into spaces. So you might go into Syria and understand what's happening in Syria, and it could be a new take on the way you see the news and the way you see the world and the way you actually understand sort of people and issues and sort of different cultures. And that I can actually see how that could work, because it's like, could you imagine if you're kind of sitting there and you're literally transported into a war zone and you can understand the tensions and the cultural differences rather than just kind of watching the news.
Imagine in real time as well.
Yeah, there was a great case earlier this year actually and it was over here, but someone created a simulation for Oculus which was based on police brutality case. Yeah. Border control, basically beat living daylights of the man. That
sounds like fun.
Yeah, but this was it. It was like the gateway for activism, because you kind of think about these things in abstraction, but what they've done is they actually synced live audio, and they created a simulation where you kind of had your phone which had 30 seconds of battery life. And you could see kind of obviously police graphically kind of beating up this dude. And the idea was to actually put people in that position to kind of really hammer home the feelings and get people thinking about that stuff. So look, in terms of adoption and where it goes and how easy it becomes, I mean, I think that Lee's probably more kind of around where film is.
How it can work we had a piece in our session about relaxation and taking holidays and actually finding balance in everyday life by being able to sort of come home at the end of the day and kind of strap yourself in and kind of like actually use that as kind of a 3D meditation, where you can actually go, exactly.
And there's so many applications. I mean, you think about that. I mean, they're talking about applications in psychology. So, I mean, you think about people who develop, say, agoraphobia. There's behavioural, psychological ways of treatments to, flooding and pushing people out. You can do that with safety. There's things on working with people with post-traumatic stress disorder. Like veterans have come back here and they get them to kind of go back while they counsel them. Education, I mean, they're talking about how virtual reality is redefining, the way that they're engaging students in universities. All of a sudden, rather than designing abstract things, you can create a simulation where people can kind of move around.
Do you need a university? That's the thing, isn't it? If you can all strap in and be in a lecture theatre, is that?
Exactly.
Exactly. And this was one of the interesting challenges they were talking about in the session as well, of maintaining the word you were talking about, authenticity, and making sure virtual reality kind of has the space and the time to act. Expensive to use at the moment. So, and brands are going in and creating ads and kind of using it for those sorts of things. And within that, that's almost disengaging people because they're seeing it as, I don't want to go and eat a McDonald's burger in virtual reality and kind of see how it's all being made and see where the cows have come from and all the rest of it. And then that's going to be their first experience. So that they're going to then jump into other spheres and take it seriously.
Yeah.
And I can understand how that's the case because they've got all the cash. And they're like, we need to do all the good things with it
cool
first.
Things, yeah.
I mean, chances are the people who get Kristy can do the military, you know, in terms of training and simulation. But
I think that's our job as well, is to convince brands to use VR in a positive space and help build it and be a part of the community that's developing VR.
Be useful.
Yeah.
Let's move on from VR to robots.
Yes.
It's a very future-gazing day today, isn't it? And personal side of robots. So again, this is bringing back Skynet type images to my mind, or maybe iRobot, I guess.
Weird looking robots.
It's always a privilege when you get kind of an MIT professor up on the stage. I mean, Cynthia runs Jibo. It's pretty crazy. I mean, the level personal robots are going to get to, and they're going to be entering our homes pretty soon when you look at what Jibo's doing. And I guess,
and what is Jibo?
So Jibo, just to explain, it's kind of your own personal robot, and basically the capabilities of these robots, they have artificial intelligence, so they can learn as you interact with them. They can learn about you, and they can obviously interact with you and help you manage your life. So I mean, you'll get Jibo kind of telling you, hey, look, you know, Kristy's going to be waking up at 7 a.m. and making a heap of noise, so make sure you take a couple of sleeping pills before you go to bed, like, just want to get back home tonight. You know, they're going to be quite influential. And I mean, it's the AI debate, as I said, protests down the street a few minutes ago. It's a massive space, and there's a lot of questions that are kind of really that need to be answered as we kind of move here.
I think one of the really interesting things she was talking about, because again, I think with this entire space, it's all the light and the dark. It's how do you use it usefully versus how does it go wrong? And like, it is all in the user, and it is how you build it up. But she was talking about one of the things they've been using it for is actually getting students ready for school. So students from underprivileged backgrounds who don't necessarily have highly educated parents, who don't have the vocabulary skills and the child and engaging them and getting their vocab skills up and sort of teaching about the world so that they're actually on par with kind of your professional kids from professional parents, so they actually have a better chance of kind of kicking off their schooling kind of really well. But then it kind of makes you think, okay, so you watch this really, it was kind of really sweet, like you're really torn. It was really sweet that these kids sort of sat there with kind of like, really sure what you are or what you're doing, and I'll have a little chat to you. So they started touching them, to then they started forming a relationship with them and sort of talking back to them and asking them questions. They were literally sitting there like with their arms around them,
telling stories together,
like it was their best friend.
Yeah, and I think that's where, because that's what she was talking about, where she was focusing most of the study on putting that emotion into the robot so we can create that
the emotion so that you can connect to the robot and actually want to talk to them. And that was fascinating from itself as well, because they were talking about putting robots into people's houses and how they're better at being a teaching tool, because like if you were talking about it before, where it's like if you've got kind of give people a textbook, or if you give them an iPad, you know, they'll engage. If you sit a robot in front of them that's got empathy and sharing ideas with you, they actually engage with their education far more, or even if it's dieting or whatever it is, they're actually on board and far more motivated. But I suppose you've got that, and then you're going, what's the robot telling my children? If they're having an emotional relationship with them, what are they saying?
Yeah, and is that something you can sort of code into a robot, the parameters for?
Well, the way that she handled that question was around, well, the parents should always, or it should be around the robot with the children as well. So it's not something like you give to the child and it's like, it's kind of like, because she was, I guess, focusing on like it being part of the family.
Yeah.
You know,
which is kind of terrifying.
Yeah.
I was like,